Yeah. Well.
Now, we got Sinew
no, I'm not gonna be home Saturday morning.
as a telemarketer.
Welcome to another episode of Eat a Deck Tech. My name is Salvador Cortez. Today I have Wyatt with me. Thank you for coming.
It's my pleasure.
Wyatt is joining us today to show us his tribal deck.
Five color company or slivers.
Slivers is the thing. So now, slivers. Why?
Two main reasons. Number one reason, slivers are cool. Like
Sure.
if you want to play, if you're not a fan of linear tribal aggro decks, might not be the deck for you. If you like merfolk, goblins, all that kind of stuff, this is probably a fun deck choice for you. And then it has, I think, legitimate place in the competitive metagame. It's mostly compared to merfolk. It's pretty similar to merfolk in terms of how it plays. Has some upsides and downsides, which we'll probably get into later. But I think it's a good choice if merfolk is a good choice and you want something that goes a little better against grindier matchups while kind of disregarding your combo matchup.
Sure, and one of the differences you get with running a 5-color version of slivers as opposed to merfolk is the collective company, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have an Aether Vial on the side. Aether Vials are very similar playstyle to merfolk. Now, I want to get into the details of every sliver here because we have a lot of slivers to go through in the main board, and then even more here on the sideboard. So, walk me through which slivers are like your favorite and how do they interact with each other?
Okay, so basically to kind of start off with, we're running 4 copies of Predatory Sliver, 4 copies of Sinew Sliver, and 4 copies of Galerider Sliver. Pretty much no matter what sliver strategy you're trying to do, if you like wake up in the morning and you say, I want to play slivers, you need kind of 4 of all these cards, almost no matter what you're doing. Sinew Sliver and Predatory Sliver are just
Lords.
They just pump your guys, they don't do anything else, and Galerider Sliver gives all your guys flying. And so this kind of gives you your Lord of Atlantis, pump your team, and evasion. And so they're in 2 separate cards, there's upsides and downsides to that. And then we're also running 4 copies of Gemhide Sliver. Gemhide Sliver just lets all your guys tap for any color mana. This is really important. The deck only runs 20 lands, and it curves up to 4 and has like a relatively heavy amount of 3-drops. And so if you don't hit Aether Vial, you're kind of hinging on Gemhide Sliver for mana fixing, and you can do a lot of interesting things with it, like you can vial it in off of Aether Vial and then instant speed collecting companies, that kind of stuff. Overall, it's a really good card. It has some synergies with other cards, such as Sedge Sliver. Sedge Sliver is Sedge Troll Sliver. Gives all your slivers Sedge Troll. For those unfamiliar, if you control a swamp, all your slivers have +1/+1. And separate ability, black, regenerate your any sliver. You don't need a swamp to do this, so you can actually, without a swamp, you can activate it with Gemhide Sliver.
They can protect and regenerate themselves for tapping for mana, is what you're trying to go for here.
Yes, yeah, it creates a really resilient board state that's really difficult to break up for a lot of decks.
Sure.
And this is probably, I think, maybe the best card in the deck. This is a real magic card. It makes your board really hard to deal with in general and just makes them huge. So that's maybe my personal favorite sliver in the deck.
So would you say that this is the reason to go the 5-color route over the Bat Slivers deck that's currently out there as well?
Absolutely.
Okay,
yeah,
that's
I think
good.
This is a major payoff for this.
Sure. So let's move ahead with your one-ofs. You have a one-of, what is his name?
Sentinel Sliver.
Sure.
Gives your slivers vigilance.
Which is good to have.
So this is kind of the, I guess there's, I think 30 slivers here. This is kind of the 30th sliver. It's definitely not bad by any means. It has a lot of really good combo potential with your other slivers. By itself, it's kind of lame, but notably, it is a 2-mana 2/2, where a lot of the rest of your guys are 2-mana 1/1s. So it'll outsize things faster. If you only if you have 2 lords, it'll be a 4/4, and everything else will be a 3/3. So that's kind of a big deal. It combos well with, like, I have Gemhide Sliver and Sedge Sliver. Well, now all my guys can attack, and then anything that dies just taps itself and regenerates itself. Or I can get all my, attack with all my guys, and then, before damage, tap out for a collected company. There are a lot of scenarios where it's really good. There's some scenarios where it's kind of just mediocre. So that's why it's kind of a one of. If you get it, it's good. If you don't, it's not a big deal. We also have one of Darkheart Sliver. There's potential for this to go up in a sideboard as well. This is just a 2-mana 2/2. All creatures have sack, gain 3 life. This is also, again, it's 2-mana 2/2, outsizes the rest of your lords. So that's kind of a big deal for when sizing matters on the battlefield. And it has some application not just against like burn matchups. A lot of times you can, like I've won a lot of games off of this card just by like things are kind of dicey and you can really easily just like kind of sack out for a few turns and just kind of build up a big enough board state to be able to come back.
It also works against with the wrath effects, correct?
Yeah, you get a little bit of value. A lot of the matchups where they're bringing wraths against you aren't too concerned with life total, but in some cases it's kind of a big deal. Ultimately, it's just a way to get extra value if you're just going to have all your guys die anyway.
Correct.
And there's a few situations where it's game winning, and it has some weird applications in a couple of the matchups.
So now you're also running 2 of Necrotic Sliver, which is the only sliver I know how to pronounce. He essentially does Vindicate, correct?
Yes. Basically, his card text reads, all slivers are Vindicate. You pay 3, blow it up, and then blow up whatever permanent on your opponent's side you want to blow up. This card's really good. A lot of, like, if you're playing a Merfolk deck, for example, and you flood out, you don't have anything to do with your mana.
Sure.
If you're playing this deck and you flood out, you can activate Vindicate Sliver twice. Like, you have... And this gives you a way to interact with your opponent that you can collect company into, which is a big deal. Like, you want to keep threat density really high in order to make collect company work, and this is a threat that lets you answer other stuff in your opponent's field. It's really flexible. It gets rid of, problematic artifacts, enchantments, and just like bad creatures or even lands. Like you can.
Well, planeswalkers is what I feel would be the important one.
Yeah, sometimes. The deck I think attacks planeswalkers relatively well because you have access to flying, and you can. But there are definitely situations where it's really hard for you to represent like good attackers through your opponent's blockers, and if you just have 3 mana, kill your guy, that's just more important than anything else. But it's a very, very flexible card. It's expensive. That's the main downside, so you might cut it in some of the faster matchups, but it's kind of a good catch-all that, again, Merfolk doesn't have access to these kind of, like, its best catch-all is like Echoing Truth, which is kind of like, I hope this is good enough for one turn, and then hopefully I win after that.
Correct.
So this gives you flexibility in your main deck.
No, let's move over to the guy who protects your guys a little bit more.
Right. So we have three.
Move over to
We have 3 copies of Diffusion Sliver. This is kind of like a Kira effect. It's 2 mana 1/1, and then it says whenever Whenever a sliver is targeted with a spell or ability your opponent controls, counter it unless they pay 2. So notably, this happens more than once per turn. If they lightning bolt it and it gets countered, and then they like fail to push it and it gets countered, they're both countered.
Sure.
So that's kind of a big deal, and also it stacks. If you have 2 on the board, they have to pay 4. If you have 3, they have to pay 6. So this is just a good creature for protecting your guys against any spot removal that's not like Abrupt Decay. It's really good against like in the grinding matchups where one of the big flexibilities is like, all right, well, I'm going to hold, my turn 1 mana open to just kill your guy, and all of a sudden, I wasted a mana. I won't be able to do anything with this mana until like turn 3. So again, just good against those kind of matchups, just helps protect your guys. Usually this will be the first thing that they have to target, but sometimes if your board state is, depending on your board state, they'll have to target something else, and then you can accrue extra value out of, getting more mana out of them. So really solid card. It really helps this deck play against, like, Jund Abzan kind of decks.
And those are the decks would you say those are the kind of decks you want to see when you're running slivers?
I would say so. I think it's definitely up there.
That's good.
We'll kind of get into matchups a little bit more later, but they're definitely one of the top decks I'm thinking about when I'm sleeving up this deck. And our last sliver in the main board is Blur Sliver. There's 3 of. Some people cut this down a little bit, but the main reason it's here, it gives all slivers haste. Main reason it's here is it's really good with the Collective Company.
Correct. That's what I see. Everything currently on board, main board, gets hit by Collective Company really, really well.
Yeah, and also Collective Brutality a little bit.
Yeah, Collective Brutality, yes.
But yeah, so it basically lets you to, if you collect company into this plus anything but probably a Lord, it's just really good. Like, you can create a very scary board state that does a lot of damage very quickly. That's a lot of the way, that's like where the explosiveness of this deck comes in a lot of times, is when you do that and you're just like, all right, well, I have now like 12 power of haste on the board, and I'm just gonna, hit you
Smash
on turn
face.
4. Yeah. It also has synergies with Gemhide Sliver. All your slivers can immediately tap for mana, so if you just want to build a really big board really fast, basically everything is 1 cheaper, and so you can just churn out a bunch of guys really fast. And so that's kind of a big deal. It also lets, if you, again, collect company on their turn, then if you already have that in play, then everything you get can then, tap for mana or whatever you need to do.
Like you stated earlier, like you can start vindicating on their end step.
Yeah, so again, people who are familiar with slivers know that the more slivers you have, the better they are, but that's really what this deck is about. It's really about having a lot of different types of creatures on the board and just the synergies that let them kind of be a better collectively than like your opponent's just individually good cards.
Sure. Now, as for removal, you're choosing to go with Dismembers. Would you walk me through why you would pick Dismember over, like, let's say you have access to Fatal Pushes, Paths?
Okay, so first off, it's just easy to cast. We'll go into the mana base in shortly, but there's only 5 colored sources of mana that let you cast non-sliver spells, and so any removal spell you're interested in is kind of on the hook for either being easy to cast through colorless mana or you don't care about casting it early. So Dismember, you can cast it off of a Mutavault, you can cast it off of Cavern of Souls. It gives your flexibility there. You don't really care about the life loss too much, but if you do, the deck also has access to black mana in situations where it's relevant. You can tap with your Gemhide Slivers to pay for it if you really need to.
Correct.
It's just kind of a good catch-all. I don't think it's necessarily ideal, but I think it's kind of the most flexible option without kind of going against your mana base too much. And we have a couple other options on the sideboard and a couple options that we could be running that aren't.
Sure. Now, you mentioned land base earlier. So your actual land bases that tap for mana, we mentioned 5. So you're on 2 basics and 3 shock lands. Now, those are pretty straightforward. We know what they do.
Yeah.
Can you explain to me the rest of the cards, like what their utilities? So some of them are pretty obvious, but I want to hear it out.
Sure. And there's a few things with the shock lands.
Sure.
We'll get into those.
Okay.
So first off, 4 Cavern of Souls. Everything in your deck costs basically a different color of mana. You need different colors of mana. Cavern of Souls is basically the best land for any tribal deck, and you have added bonus of kind of being extra efficient against just kind of controller, that kind of like any kind of counter strategies that might be relevant. They're not really right now, but it's just kind of a little added bonus. So it's just basically land that taps for any color of mana as long as it's for a sliver. That's pretty good. Sliver Hive, kind of the same deal, except it's specifically for a sliver, but if you're naming anything else other than Cavern of Souls, or other than Sliver off of Cavern of Souls, I'd say Sliver Hive is the better land for this deck, because it has the added utility of being able to pay 5, tap, and make a 1/1 colorless sliver. And that's really good in grinding matchups. Really good. There's, again, what does Merfolk do when it gets more than 4 lands? Nothing. Like, it has nothing in the deck that uses any mana whatsoever outside of that. What do you do when you have a bunch of lands or you have a Gemhide Sliver and a big board with slivers? You can make a bunch of 1/1s that are actually going to be more like 3/3s with card text on them.
Correct.
And that's a really big deal, especially with a lot of the effects here where you're like, okay, if I have a ton of mana, if I have 8 or 9 mana or whatever it is, if I have a Necrotic Sliver out, if the game's in a stall, I'm just vindicating something on their board every turn.
You're getting ahead of it.
Yeah. And so it doesn't matter how much mana it costs at that point. If we're just both top decking, I'm just going to use whatever I have. And I've won games against Jund and Albson where they'd have a Kalitas and just, all right, if I have a Darkheart Sliver on the board, all right, and you're when you go to attack, make a 1/1, sack it for life. You don't gain any lifelink. Really good in those situations. Good for slowing the game down when you need it to, and good for just having dudes on the board without committing against sweeper builds.
Gotcha.
So really good card for this deck. And finally we have Mutavault,
Which is a sliver.
Yeah, very conveniently is a sliver.
And it happens to be a merfolk as well.
Yeah, it's a lot of things. it's kind of fun when you play against other Merfolk decks and you're like, oh, well, this has Island Walk, what's up? This is an awesome card. Notably, it doesn't hurt your mana base that much. In Merfolk, because I've also played Merfolk before, and a lot of times you'll be turn 2 and your hand is Island, Mutavault, and like a bunch of dudes that cost blue, and you're just like, what am I doing with my life? Why do I run this card? I know it's good, but why am I doing this? And Slivers, despite the fact that everything costs a different color of mana, you can basically cast the vast majority of your deck off of one like land that taps for any color for a Sliver. Like, so if your hand is like Cavern of Souls Mutavault or like Sliver Hive Mutavault, you can cast like everything here. So the cost of including Mutavault in your deck is not very high. And it's really good. Again, it has more utility than just being a big creature. It's cool when you give Vigilance, Mutavault Vigilance, pretty good. You can attack with it immediately when you play it. It just has a lot of good utility, and again, good against decks that you're worried about kind of sweeping you out of the game. Just good attacking like Tron and stuff like that. Probably one of your only ways to actually win that matchup. So it's awesome card, and it
blocks Edge champion as well.
Yeah,
That's relevant.
That's true, and you can do the same thing with the Sliver Hive tokens as well. So it's really good in that regard. If you're playing a tribal deck, you're kind of like, all right, well, I'm probably playing Mutavault, right? But I think this is definitely above the bar in terms of Mutavault decks. And then finally we get to our colored mana base. We have, it's going to look a little weird because we have Overgrown Tomb, Watery Grave, and Godless Shrine. All those tap for black mana. We have like 3 black cards in the main deck. The reason for this is Sedge Sliver.
You need the swamp.
Yeah, we need a swamp, and the flexibility of having like a breeding pool and like red sources of mana, all that kind of stuff is not really that useful when we can compare it to just like, all right, well, I'm just going to have like the best 3 mana lord for Slivers. And so that's really the main reason that this land base is set up like this. Our basics are a swamp and a forest. We prioritize green mana to cast Telekinetic Company without Gemhide Sliver. And then other than that, black is, basics are mostly there in case you get halved. Sometimes you fetch them against burn. But you really don't want to draw these ever. You're okay with the forest, you really never want to draw the swamp. But the swamp is really important, so you can't get ghost quartered out of like having your team pumped. So that's kind of a big deal. And also, there's a lot of Path to Exile floating around. There's a reasonable amount of ghost quarter floating around. You want at least 2 basics, I think. And I think that the swamp is just better than almost anything else you could run. Maybe you go 2 forest, and you have 3 Verdant Catacombs to fetch all these up, and this gets any of those. So as long as you draw a fetch land, you can get whatever you want.
Again, 5 curve out, keep going.
Yeah. So that's what we're looking at mostly in terms of the main deck. You want to get a sideboard?
Yeah. So sideboard, you have 7 one-ofs. So before we get to the 7 one-ofs, 8 one-ofs due to the big guy there.
Yeah.
So
the Hivelord.
Let's start off with the multiple copies of Harmonic Sliver and Frenetic.
Yep.
Sure. Walk me through those 2 first.
Okay, so Harmonic is probably the best Sliver sideboard, like the best sideboard card that's a Sliver.
Gotcha.
All your Slivers have, whenever it enters, you blow up an artifact or enchantment. Notably, you have to be a little bit careful about this because it's mandatory. If you have an Aether Vial, they don't have anything, you blow up your own Aether Vial. You have to be a little careful with this. But in the matchups you want this, the upside vastly outweighs the downside.
And let's just try to name 3 decks. Which are which do these come in for?
Affinity, Lantern Control, and anything that brings in like problematic enchantments. I guess Boggles, but like anything that brings in problematic enchantments post board, stuff like Worship and stuff like Ghostly Prison, that kind of stuff.
Or Blood Moon decks.
Yeah, also Blood Moon decks. We'll get into that in a bit. That's kind of a rough matchup already. But yeah, so this it's over cost for what it is, 3 mana 1/1. But against the decks it's good. It's really good. And again, this affects all your Slivers. If you collect a company in this, you get 2 hits.
You're removing 2
Yeah, they both see each other enter. a lot of times you're going to save this because it's just going to hit that one key thing. You know, if you're against Lantern, it's going to be like, all right, I'm going to wait until I can just blow up your Ensnaring Bridge and just win the game. So it's really good in those games. You might bring it against like Merfolk or something like that. It hits Spreading Seas, but it's mostly the heavy artifact enchantment decks.
Gotcha.
And Frenetic Sliver, kind of a weird card.
Really funny card.
Yeah, it's a 3-mana 2/2, and then gives all your Slivers like pay 0, flip a coin, and if you win the flip, you blink it until the end of turn. It works like Flicker Wisp, and if you lose, you just sack it. So this is there for sweeper decks. If your opponent says Wrath of God, you're like, okay, well, I keep like about half my guys. Like you know, sometimes you'll get lucky and like I've won like 4 out of 5 flips or something. You're like, oh, okay, well now I just like win the game because my opponent's Wrath did literally nothing.
Because I flipped the coin.
Yeah, because I got lucky. Sometimes you'll lose and just, you know, everything got destroyed. It's okay versus spot removal. It just basically gives you 50-50 of being, you know, all right, your bolt didn't do anything or your path didn't do anything. But it's really there for the decks that have, you know, Damnation, Wrath of God, Tron decks, that kind of stuff. Basically any decks that's trying to just blow up your whole board at once.
Gotcha. Let's start off here at the top. I cannot see. So I have Screeching Sliver, and we'll go through that guy first. All Slivers have target player puts the top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard.
Yeah. So this is kind of a weird card. This is maybe the 14th or 15th sideboard card, but this is here mostly for 2 reasons. One, if you need another 1-drop. You just kind of bring it in to bring your curve down. If you're playing as something really fast like Infect or Burn, something like that, sometimes you just need stuff to do on turn 1, and it doesn't matter what it does. You bring it in then, but it's mostly there for decks that are trying to prevent from attacking. So again, worship decks. What did I say earlier? Lantern Control.
Yes.
Yeah. It lets you kind of build your board up and say, you know, oh, I can't attack, that's okay, I'm going to mill you like 6-8 cards every turn. And like, that's
pretty
a real thing you can do,
yes.
You know. So it's mostly there as a backdoor win condition against those decks. But I'd say it comes in kind of a low amount of the time.
Sure.
But it's there if you need it. Next we get to Telekinetic Sliver. This is only one of 2 Slivers in the entire 75, and they're both in the sideboard that aren't hittable by Collect Company.
Gotcha.
So if you can't be hit by Collect Company, you need to be really good.
Yeah.
And Telekinetic Sliver is really good. It basically is opposition, but for Slivers. All your Slivers have tap target permanent. This is brutal against creature decks of most varieties. It lets you just control the board state. Really hard for them to do anything if they have problematic cards that you can't deal with, like you don't have flying, but they have like some kind of flying attacker. You can just tap it down every turn, and eventually you just build your board state up. You tap all your guys down. If you have enough guys, you just tap down all their mana. They can't do anything. You lock them out of the game, and eventually you just tap down all your guys, untap, and then swing for lethal.
Swing for lethal.
Really solid card.
Scary.
Yeah, it's good against all kinds of creature decks, and sometimes you'll bring it against Tron, just because your interaction against Tron is pretty low, and if you can just slam it on 4 before they blow up your board and just say, all right, you're never going to have mana on your main phase ever again, you just win the game. Yeah, so awesome card. Really like this card.
Next one would be Manaweft Sliver.
Manaweft Sliver. It's the 5th copy of Gemhide Sliver. Technically, you should run 4 of this in the main board because it only affects your Slivers, and Gemhide Sliver affects all Slivers. I realize because I like the art better, but it loses you like a 0.25% versus like Merfolk decks or whatever. And if you ever play the Mirror, which you probably won't, but it's a consideration. And this is just this is mostly for matchups where I take out Aether Vial because I need extra sources of mana. It's good against decks with low amounts of removal, just because the decks where you need a lot of mana and they don't have a lot of ways to interact with you, it's really good. So you just want as many of those effects as possible. You bring it in against anything that's trying to hit out your mana base, just to kind of have more resilience against that. You know, I'm not going to say anything's good against the Blood Moon decks. Blood Moon kind of hurts this deck a lot. Honestly, that's probably the main downside against playing something like Merfolk, is that your mana base is susceptible to, you know, Stone Rain and Blood Moon and just stuff that blows up your lands.
Gotcha.
It helps a lot there.
Next one we have is Homing Sliver.
Yeah, so this will get some funny looks every time you cast it the first time against an opponent, because you're just going to say, end of turn, pay 3, I'm going to Sliver Cycle this. And they're going to look at you and they're just going to say, what?
Sure.
What did you do? So it's 3-mana 2/2, and all slivers in your hand, if it's on the board, have Sliver Cycling, and it also has Sliver Cycling, which means you can pay 3 and discard it, search for a Sliver. This card's good. I bring it in. Most games I bring in Telekinetic Sliver, because it's a really good way to search it without, you can't come into it, but you can get it with that. It's good against just decks where hey, I know this thing's really good, only have X amount of copies of it, I want X plus 1. So I like it in that scenario. It's also pretty good in the grindy matchups, because if you have it on the board and you just draw something low impact like a Gemhide Sliver or something like that, you can just get rid of it and get like a Lord.
And then put some presence on the board.
Yeah, and so I definitely like this card. I've seen builds of this deck that run like 3 or 4 of it in the main deck. That's a little more toolboxy than I want to be with this deck, but it's an option to consider for sure. It's definitely a powerful card, if not, again, it's expensive, but it gives you something to do. A lot of times, a lot of games you'll have a lot of mana, and you can do something with it.
Sure. Siphoning Sliver, what's the decision on that?
All Slivers have lifelink. Good against stuff trying to kill you, basically. You can argue about bringing it in against something like combo decks that can only do a certain amount of damage.
Right.
I don't really know how I feel about that personally. I've tried it before with some success. Because usually if you're sitting at that many guys to gain that much life, you usually just kill them anyway. But again, good against burn, gains life. Good combination with Darkheart Sliver. Darkheart Sliver probably better against burn just because they can't really skullcrack you out of the game.
Correct.
But if you jam this turn 3 and just start swinging, you'll gain a lot of life and kind of prevent you from losing the game that way. So I'd say, again, it's also black. It's the only mono black sliver in the deck, which is good for casting it. But,
yeah.
I've seen some decks run main board. I don't know how I feel about that. It seems a little low impact to me.
Sure. The next one we have is, cannot pronounce that.
Cautery Sliver.
Cautery Sliver.
Yeah, this is Goblin Legionnaire, but a Sliver.
That sounds really spicy there.
Yeah. So all Slivers have pay 1 sack, deal 1 damage, or prevent 1 damage. It's kind of like a baby version of Necrotic Sliver. You only pay 1, but you only deal 1 damage. It's supposed to blow up anything. But against a lot of matchups, deal 1 damage is the same thing.
Yeah.
So this is good against Infect. This is really good against Infect. If you aren't dead in 3 turns or whatever, every draw you have just kills one of their guys, and you have way more Slivers than they have Infectors. And you can, depending on how many creatures you have, you can win like the battle over the stack. If they try to pump their guy, you can just blow it up again.
Gotcha.
But this is good. This is good against Death and Taxes. Death and Taxes has a lot of 1 health creatures. Blows up Thalia, blows up Flicker Wisp. So you want it against those matchups.
Gotcha.
It has some. It has some limited application against burn in terms of damage prevention and stuff like that, but it's mostly there against just like make a bunch of 1/1s. Elves. Elves good against elves. So it's mostly here for those matchups. It's also it's on the harder side to cast. It's 2 colors, and one of those colors is black or green.
Yeah.
So that's a minor consideration, but that's mostly what it's there for.
Sure. Next one over is Opaline Sliver.
Yeah. So Opaline Sliver says. Whenever your Sliver is targeted by a spell your opponent controls, you may draw a card. So this is just bringing it against the 1/1 removal decks. Good against Abs, and good against Jund, good against kind of Grixis and Jeskai decks. Again, kind of same thing with the Diffusion Sliver. If your board is really built up and there's something important that your opponent needs to kill, this is like a 3-for-1 instead.
Yeah.
They'll kill that and then they'll kill your thing.
And then you get a draw.
Yeah. So it's just good. You have some kind of corner case scenarios where they might like target your guy, and then you get to draw a card, and you can then violate that card and do something with it. But mostly it's just there for accruing extra value against the decks that run, paths and bolts and that kind of stuff.
Gotcha. Moving over to your only spells in their sideboard.
Yep.
Warping Wail, great card, new edition. It's currently in the standard block.
Yeah.
So what's the decision due to Warping Wails being in the sideboard?
So Warping Wail is it's mostly there because 1, you can cast it. The deck runs 12 colorless lands. You can make a lot of colorless mana. It's very easy to cast Warping Wail, and again, it represents something kind of like Dismember, where you have Colorless Mana open that your opponent doesn't necessarily expect anything to happen against, and you can interact. This is mostly there for its ability to remove 1 toughness or attack creatures. So again, you're holding open mana that your opponent might not expect anything to happen with. Same thing with Dismember. You can cast it with, you have Sliver Hive and Cavern of Souls. What are you going to cast? Oh, Warping Wail. It gives you some reaction against the decks that run a lot of small guys. Just remove your Infector, remove your Elf, remove your Thalia, whatever. And it also has an application against some combo decks, good against Scapeshift by countering sorceries. Against some combo decks like Ad Nauseam, it's really not worth bringing in. It doesn't really do that much because they mostly interact at instant speed, but it has some play in some other matchups like that. And it's also reasonable to bring in against decks that run like a lot of supers. Like, I don't know, if you're playing against like Mardu or something like that, if they have like 8 copies or whatever of combined like Wrath and Anger, you might be like, all right, well, counter target sorcery sounds pretty good here.
Yeah, it'll also slow down like Past in Flames against Storm.
Yeah, you can bring it against Storm for sure. The third mode you almost never use. I used it once, and then I tried to cast Sliver Hivelord off of it, which has no colored mana pips in it, or no colorless mana pips in it. So that was pretty good.
That's a thing.
Yeah, but you usually won't use this to ramp. Usually you use it to do anything else.
Sure. Now for the big spicy card.
Yeah.
Which I personally like. Sliver Hivelord.
Yeah, so this is the This is the big Sliver Lord out of what, M14?
Yes.
Yeah, or M15.
M15.
Yeah, okay. This card's pretty sick. For those unfamiliar, just all your slivers actually have indestructible, which is pretty good against decks trying to destroy your slivers. I used to bring this card against decks that are trying to just kill my stuff. Like this, Jund can't kill this card. It is almost not possible. Yeah, it involves having no cards on the board and Lily on a sack. That's their only out. It's less good against Advent, they have Path to Exile, but against a lot of grindy decks, just having guys that can't die, that's really good. Usually I bring it against decks that just have removal. That's kind of the.
Oh, it's great against like the big creature decks too, like Eldrazi.
Oh yeah, if you just yes, it's very good against Eldrazi. If you can make it that far, you're just like, all right, well, my guys can block your guys forever. So we're gonna go until someone draws a thing that taps out the other guy's creatures. Yeah. So I like this card. It's not just like a cool splashy card. It has like legitimate application in the deck. So definitely a fan. And it's really cool to cast it because people are just like, what just happened to me?
And it feels like a commander at some point. Like, this is my legendary.
Yep. Yeah.
This is the reason behind this whole deck.
Here it is. Yep. And it's not too hard to cast either. The only problem with casting it is that Need of Vault doesn't contribute to it at all.
Correct.
But everything else makes it pretty easy to cast. If you have a Gemhide Sliver and any amount of slivers, you're pretty good to go.
Gotcha. Now, let's say you go to a tournament. What is something you do and do not want to see across the board from you?
Okay, if I sit down and my opponent goes like turn 1 like some like green or black land or like some red or black land or whatever, it does nothing, I'm like, all right, we're good.
You're good.
Like,
so the mid-range decks.
Yeah, so I'm happy to see the mid-range decks. I'm happy to see Grixis, Jeskai, anything counterspell based, absolutely. Just decks trying to kind of 1-for-1 me, absolutely want to see those. If most creature decks, like most like Death and Taxes, totally fine. I want to see those. I want to see stuff like Band Company, those kind of things. So mostly looking to beat other fair decks kind of at their own game kind of thing. This deck can accrue a lot of value. It's really sticky in a lot of situations. It's really hard to just pick important creatures off the board. And if you're playing against decks that either that's their only game plan or their game plan is I have 4 or 6 pieces of removal in the deck and my goal is just to pick off linchpin parts to your plan, it's also really good against that. So the decks I don't want to see are anything that's way faster than me.
Examples.
So Infect, it's a little better now with the Get Pro ban, but still it's a problem. Affinity with good draws, like Affinity, especially with like Steel Overseer draws. Really hard for this
yeah.
deck to deal with. It has very limited ways to get rid of Steel Overseer. That's another thing Cautery Sliver would come against. Yeah.
Warping Wail.
Yeah, Warping Wail. Yep. Absolutely. So you can kind of beat some of the cranial plating draws. It's not that hard. You do have access to flying and ways to kind of pick off the creatures and their artifacts even. But you really can't beat the go wide plans. If a deck kind of can go wider better than you can, through stuff like make a ton of Lingering Souls and activate Gabbing Township a bunch of times.
Yeah.
That's hard to deal with a lot of times. Also, you don't want to see, again, decks faster than you. Just
How's the burn matchup?
I'm not entirely sure. I would say that the creature-based burn matchup is better. I think the more recent Boros burn matchup, that's just like a bunch of burn spells, is worse. This deck is pretty good against Eidolon, good against kind of those aspects of the deck. It can struggle a bit against Grimwolfmancer, but a lot of the decks have been cutting that recently. It's just not that good against, well, you kill me like turn 4, turn 5, I'm just gonna like cast some Boros Charms and you can't really do anything about it, so you die.
Yeah.
And it's bad against the really explosive, like multiple Goblin Guys or Swift Spirit starts. So it's again, Burn's a deck that can kind of win any matchup, so I don't feel too bad about it. But I'd say it's moderate to a little bit unfavored. And then you definitely don't want to see combo decks. Ad Nauseam is maybe the worst matchup for this deck at all. You have very few ways to interact with that deck. Really, the only ways you can do it are just by being way faster than them and hoping they have nothing.
Gotcha.
Or by backdoor winning with Diffusion Sliver. So if you have a Diffusion Sliver and they target you with all their Lightning Storms, and you have lands in your hand, if you pitch it and target Diffusion Sliver, it says counter unless you pay 2. If they don't have 2 mana, the game's over.
That is a very interesting interaction I never thought about.
Yeah,
so it does work that way, correct?
Yes, it does work that way. It's not as good. Kira is slightly better in that regard because they can't have extra mana to deal with it.
Gotcha.
But you can run through this card and you can tutor it. You can so a lot of that matchup a lot of times is just finding this card and finding extra mana or extra lands and just hoping. Other than that, you just have to present a fast clock and hope that they can't assemble their combo, in 4 or 5 turns.
Gotcha. Now, if there's anything you'd like, if there's anybody out there that wants to move into running this, is there any advice you would give that person?
Just like how to play the deck.
Yes.
I would say that a lot of times you are not the beatdown matchup. You are the controller slash, like a lot of times you're trying to present threats, like your whole deck is creatures. But if you're a lot of matchups, you're really trying to just control the board and create difficult board states for your opponent to deal with that they can't really very efficiently attack into. And then a lot of times you'll win just over the course of 1 or 2 turns, around like 5 or 6 or whatever.
Gotcha.
You will have some explosive draws that just like 1-drop Lord, haste guy, dead. Like you can kill on turn 4 with good draws. But you won't have those draws all the time.
Gotcha.
So a lot of the times it's better to kind of take it slower and just against the slower matchups, just try to play for value as much as possible unless you would die, basically.
Gotcha.
So like unless your opponent's presenting a fast clock, you kind of just are free to do whatever you want. That's I'd say most of what I'd say. I guess the other thing is just kind of try to be tricky and kind of be like this is kind of metagaming, but a lot of people just don't know what slivers do.
Yeah, correct.
So if you hold like Collect Company at the end of their turn, and there's a ton of possibilities of cards that you could Collect Company into that just might like immediately win the game in some combination, and your opponent has really just no way of calculating for that, either like even if they know what slivers do, right? It's really hard to determine what could come up and make you win or lose the game on an attack step. And that's I think the main thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Great advice. That about wraps it up. Once again, I want to thank you, Wyatt, for coming down to show us your deck.
Yeah,
amazing deck.
Great.
Love hearing every option about it. just a reminder, we do have Modern on Mondays at the Game Hub, 6:30 p.m. with a $5 entrance fee, as well as Collector Legion every Wednesday, same price, $5, and at 6:30 p.m. as well. That about wraps it up. Thank you.